the Sheffield Rotherham. Oh, from the Sheffield Rotherham Wildlife Trust, we have Christine King, a founding member of the partnership and a representative from the Sheffield Tree Action Group. And we have Paul Selby, another founding member of the partnership and the community street planting lead for the partnership. And this first slide, just gives you an idea of who the current partners within the partnership are. So in addition to those I've just mentioned, we've also got Caroline from the Woodland Trust, and Sarah Shawley, who is formerly of the Woodland Trust, but who is a representative for the Street Tree Wardens. And I'll talk a little bit about the Street Tree Wardens through the course of this presentation. Can you go on to the next slide, please, Nikki? So a little bit of background to the partnership. I'm sure many of you on this webinar will understand or know or have been part of the sort of origins of the partnership in terms of the dispute. So Streets Ahead contract started in 2012 and the first concerns raised in 2013. And where this ultimately led, I think everybody knows, ultimately to the Lowcock report that came out last year, and the formal apology that the council has issued and is continuing to sort of follow through, and an understanding really that serious mistakes were made. What's particularly interesting, however, is where we come into this discussion. There's a lot talked around the actual dispute and the issues that sort of caused that and how that is now being resolved. The key dates that I need to just draw attention to were 2018 on the slide here, when a joint position statement was reached to sort of create the formation of the partnership. And if you can go on to the next slide, please, Nikki. And really, from that, work commencing on the creation of the Street Tree strategy, which was initially launched in 2020, and following consultation was adopted in 2021. Sorry, the next slide, please, Nikki. And I think that it's worth saying that partnerships across the country are not uncommon, but they're typically formed by a particular agency that is looking to bring together people in terms of a mix of agency funding, resources, whatever it may be, to tackle a particular issue. I'm not aware of any partnership other than this one, which was born out of the dispute specifically, and which at its heart was around resolving issues over governance, transparency, how trees in the city were to be managed and maintained. But I think particularly for the partnership, it's also around clear actions as to where we want to go for the longer term. So the sort of remit of the partnership wasn't just in the creation of the strategy around how we manage what we have. It's looking to Sheffield and the Sheffield of the future, and how we specifically help to deliver a more climate resilient city through its street trees. Obviously, only one part of a much broader piece, looking at sort of urban forestry and as a whole. For me, as an independent voice coming into the partnership, it was really the strategy that sort of sold it to me. It's an exemplar piece of work. It really is being held up by multiple agencies, Forestry Commission amongst others, as an excellent example of how a strategy can both look to the issues we've had and are working through, and how we can sort of future face. And you can see on the slide that's currently on screen the vision of the strategy, which it sort of is that duality between maintenance and also sort of thinking about future delivery. Next slide, please, Nikki. So in terms of the strategy, there are six outcome areas. And much of the early work of the partnership's been focused, as you may expect, on outcome one. Because this outcome is focused on ensuring that Sheffield street trees are sustainably and carefully managed. So it is really closely linked to the issues that caused the dispute and the resulting campaign. And as such, it was fitting really that those were the first issues that needed to be addressed. And you can see here, I won't go through each one because we can take questions on this, a table that shows the main action points for each outcome area and the current sort of status of those outcomes. So this is within our current annual report. And if it's completed, it's completed. But just for clarity, the difference between an ongoing action and an in-progress action, because they're sort of, it sounds similar. An ongoing action is something that has been started, that we've been talking through in much detail, and will never be completed. It's an ongoing thing that we need to maintain and to make sure that we continue to improve on as that aim sort of carries forward. Whereas a in-progress aim is one that we have started initial conversations around, but really haven't sort of delved into any kind of decision making on as yet. So it's something that is very much a focus of where we are at the moment with the strategy and with the partnership. Next slide, please. So outcome 2 around resilience is one of much debate. Ultimately, it concerns species selection and general sort of view from the public, at least, that when new trees are going in, that they should be the flowering species such as cherry. But we are thinking sort of more broadly around that. How do we diversify our species across the city? Because the greater diversity that we have, both in terms of native species, absolutely, and potentially sort of naturalized species or ornamental species, how do we diversify that mix so that we can make sure that trees across the city are helping us to address climate resilience? Because everyone will no doubt have heard of pests such as ash dieback. If we have single species trees that can be susceptible to either increased temperatures, stress, or pests, then there's a high percentage chance that they will fail across the city, and we need to try and work through that. So I'll talk a little bit more about some of the initiatives that we're working on in that particular arena, and we've made good progress in this area in terms of working out how to approach this, but not a great deal of inroads in actual thinking about new planting. But I'll again come to that in a moment. The next slide, please, Nick. So for outcome 3, you can see clearly this is one that we haven't had the opportunity or the resource to get to at the current time. This is specifically looking about the wider value and benefits that flow from street trees. And it's a core area that we are looking to focus on as we come into 2024 and into 2025, really to try and start our thinking around how we deal with this area and how we can measure that there is benefits rather than things declining, that we can actually quantify that the action of additional street tree planting, diversifying species, addressing pests, those sorts of issues can show that the wider benefits that flow from street trees can really be captured. You know, those may consider things like the capture of airborne particulates for pollution control, for instance, and that might target how we focus strategic planting within the city to arterial streets, as an example. Next slide, please, Nikki. Outcome 4, again, good progress. This is really to do with tree equity in distribution of tree cover across the city. We've got a very leafy west and a very poor tree coverage to the east of the city. And really what we're looking to do is to try and level up that inequity, that sort of balance as it currently is sort of not in place. And very recently, some of you will be aware, or I hope you're aware, of the Woodland Trust's publication of the tree equity mapping for Sheffield. So we will be using this tree equity mapping as a tool to help us direct where we want to go into and work with communities to help planting on the ground. And so from a bottom-up approach, as well as to work at policy level, influencing planning decisions and master plans and the council's approach from a top-down approach to try and level up that balance. Next slide, please. In terms of outcome 5, increased street canopy cover, it's no surprise that an increase in canopy cover goes hand in hand with new planting. But we also, at the moment, the partnership also act to comment on applications and to help influence local planning policy to raise the importance of canopy cover in those arenas. So when new applications come in, we don't comment on them all, but there are some applications that we particularly select to really lobby for additional street tree planting to be considered. And for master plans for regions or neighbourhoods, similarly, we're sort of entering into that discourse with the local authority to really promote street trees and the importance of street trees for canopy cover to help us address urban cooling, amongst other things. Next slide, please. And then the last outcome, outcome 6, is a key action. A key action from this outcome was the establishment of the Street Tree Warden Scheme. And unfortunately, Sarah Shawley, who represents the wardens, is unable to join us this evening, but she is the representative of the Street Tree Wardens. She feeds the discussions and insights of all the men and women who already participate in the scheme into the partnership. And the street tree wardens that we have do a great job of walking the streets, looking out for issues with existing tree stock and reporting those issues, whether it's works around trees from utility companies or storm damage or whatever it may be. But our wider aim is to grow the scheme and to diversify the role of street tree wardens so that we can recruit tree champions, essentially, across the city to not only look out for issues with existing trees, but to help us promote the benefits of new planting, particularly in those areas where there's a low canopy cover and where tree equity is quite low. Next slide, please. So what have we achieved already? Next slide. So the first thing that I want to talk around, I won't spend a lot of time, is that we've established a partnership charter. Clearly, there have been historic issues within the partnership and over sort of trust and transparency. And it was really important from my point of view, coming into the partnership, that we established how the partners should work with one another, what we're committed to achieving, what it looks like when we get it right, and to give the partners a mechanism to call out behaviours that aren't appropriate. So basically to sort of develop a sense of mutual respect. And ultimately, the partnership always works through consensus. We debate an issue, often very difficult, knotty issues, and we will look to outcomes through consensus. And it's I have to say, it's been a really enlightening environment for me to work in personally, and I find it incredibly rewarding in that context. And the chartership is sort of foundational to that and to any members or people who come and speak with us. Next slide, please. We've also, through our work, particularly with Outcome 1, really transformed the conversation in Sheffield around tree management, so existing tree stock. And we have now, for 2 years in a row, just approved a second time round, been recognised as a tree city of the world, which is a very rigorous process. There's sort of 5 core areas as to how you go through and demonstrate that you qualify as a tree city of the world. In the UK, there are only 19. Our closest sort of tree city is Leeds. And you're essentially then part of quite a unique club, and part of that means that you can learn lessons from how those other tree cities are managing their stock, and you can bring those lessons learned into the way that trees are managed within Sheffield. And I think it's testament to the hard work of all those partners who've helped to make that a reality. We've also helped we've worked with the PEFC to create a new certification for urban trees. So PEFC accredit mostly rural contexts or estate contexts, that not urban contexts. And we've achieved a certificate of compliance through the PEFC, which is fantastic work. And we continue to work with them to go on to full accreditation. We've also published street tree guidelines for the management of Sheffield's street trees. You can find a copy on our website. I won't sort of dwell on what's in there, but it's trying to pull out all this good practice and to put that into a sort of digestible format. Next slide, please. In terms of the street tree wardens, we've developed a handbook so that new street tree wardens joining the programme have a resource that they can immediately tap into that explains what the street tree wardens scheme is seeking to do at this current time. Although, as I said, we're looking to try and develop that role and to answer some of the questions that they may have in that work. The Street Tree Warden Handbook equally is on our website, so please do, if you're interested in thinking about maybe being a street tree warden, or you know somebody who might be, it's a good resource to have a look at in the first instance. Next slide, please. Through the work of Paul, particularly who's here for the Q&A, and who heads up our community planting strand or program, we've already achieved or been able to plant 238 trees within the Sheffield streets, which is great. And obviously, we want to be doing a lot more of that. So as a partnership, we are also in partnership with the Trees for Streets organisation, which is a charity that works with local authorities and other organisations across the country. And that is to create a platform within which, if you as an individual want to plant a tree outside of your house, you can, or wherever you want to plant a tree, you can go onto this platform and you can go through a questionnaire to establish suitability, excuse me. And then if your location is suitable, sorry, my voice is going, then you can pay a fee to have that tree planted. It equally allows people to come together and crowdfund for whole streets, or for businesses or for individuals to just donate philanthropically to create a pot which we can then use as a partnership to look at strategic planting across the city. Now, we're acutely aware, sorry, I'm just going to take some water. We're acutely aware that at the moment, the cost of planting a tree within Sheffield streets is quite high. And so the partnership is working really hard with different agencies to see how we can bring that cost down to everybody who wants to sort of plant a tree wherever they may be. Next slide, please. We held our first annual celebration and an engagement event at the Sheffield Tree Fair in the Botanical Gardens. That was last May, and we'll be looking to do something similar again this May, really to raise the profile of the partnership, which is again what this event is about, and also to answer people's questions about street trees, to try and talk around how trees should be managed, and to promote the Street Tree Warden scheme. So look out for that in the summer. It was a great event. It was really well attended. Next slide, please. And we recognised that we didn't have a presence. So we've spent time creating a website, which the link's at the end of the presentation. So please do go on. We continually post our resources on the website. We also post all the notes of all of our meetings. We're very transparent about the conversations that we're having and the agendas that we're working through. And the website will continue to develop as a resource as we move forward. Next slide. And we've just published our second annual report. So much of the work that we're doing is summarised in the report. It establishes what progress has been made and where we're seeking to focus for the following year, which is, I think, the next couple of slides, which I'll just quickly talk through. So what are we looking to achieve next? So we are currently reviewing our membership. So we're looking to organisations who have a voice for Sheffield street trees and who can help us contribute to the partnership's work. We recognise that there is a lot to do. The strategy is really ambitious. And if we're to deliver the outcomes of the strategy at pace and in pace with the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, then we need to be able to draw on more people and more voice and experience. So we are looking at our membership. And we've also established 4 working groups, which, as you can see here, community planting engagement, the wardens, and a data evaluation group Those strands are specifically focused on particular outcomes. So take the community planting group is to unpick the things that are the blockers that prevent planting or prohibit planting, and to then work through those to create opportunities for more planting within Sheffield streets through funding, through talking with people and so on. And we're looking to recruit, again, people to each of these 4 working groups who have a particular interest and particular focus. So if you're interested in community planting, then please get in touch with Miller and she will signpost you to Paul. Similarly, for the Street Tree Warden Scheme, that will be Sarah. The engagement is more about how we, as an organisation, go into schools, talk to other agencies, talk about what we're doing, and this webinar is part of that. And then lastly, the data evaluation group is really about capturing from all these strands what's happening, identifying appropriate ways to measure it so that we can determine what impact we're actually having, whether negative or positive, so that we can ultimately determine how to move the partnership forward. Next slide, thank you. The development of a strategic palette, I'm just going to spend a moment just talking about this, because there will be some other events coming up in the not too distant future specifically focused on this. At the moment, Sheffield has a planting list from which, when a tree is needing to be replaced because it's being felled, or new planting is going to go in, that it's selected from. But we are looking to try and develop a planting palette that is spatially located for Sheffield, that says in this area, then you should be planting this, this, or this. And that's planting that will help link areas of high biodiversity value, planting that might have flood attenuation benefits, planting that will deal with it or help combat airborne particulates for arterial streets and so on, a planting that preserves areas, identities and characters and so on. So we're looking to do a piece of work that helps to map Sheffield and its needs against a planting palette so that a community group can say, we want to plant some trees, we live here, and look at the palette and say, okay, so for diversity, for resilience, we need to be planting this, this, or this in this scenario. It's quite an ambitious task, and we'll be organising some workshops to work through the how and the why and the wherefore to see if we can bring that to a reality. There's plenty of community tree planting projects that will be in the offing once we have worked through the community tree planting strand to identify some of these blockers. So we will always be looking at tree planting opportunities and pursuing tree equity. That's really following the Woodland Trust's publication of their mapping, a real driver for our decision making. Next slide, please. So if you want to find out more, obviously you can ask us lots of questions now. We're here to do that, but you can also go to our website, which is listed, as is the Trees for Streets site, if you want to buy a tree outside your house, or you want to contribute to a philanthropic pot for strategic planting. Next slide, please. So thanks for listening. I hope that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour through the presentation, just under half an hour. So I'll hand you back to Camilla. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nathan. Really interesting. And thank you to those of the panel who've been busy answering questions in the chat. We've had quite a few through. As I say, we'll try and get through as many as we can. So a reminder, if you still have any questions, please pop them in the chat. Remember, you can like other people's questions. We'll get through as many as we can. We'll post a sort of summary of all the questions and answers on the website afterwards. And remember, this is being recorded as well. So this will also be out on the Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust YouTube page. So if you want to watch back any of the questions or direct them to anyone else to watch, that's where you'll find them, and we'll circulate the link. Okay, so start us off then, we've had a few questions. You mentioned about Trees for Streets, Nathan, so I think I'll start with the Trees for Streets one, where we've had a question just pointing out that the charges in Sheffield are on the high side compared to other councils. And I know Paul's put a little bit of a response to this in the chat, but I just thought that that was a good one to start with, because I know this is something that we have been doing some thinking about. So what I'll do on that one is I'll go initially to, I think, Nathan, and then I'll see if any other panel member wants to come in.
Thanks, Millie. Yes, no, we absolutely recognise that the costs for Trees for Streets in Sheffield are higher than in other places. There are a number of reasons for that, and I'm sure that Paul and Kieran will probably jump in and help kind of explain some of those. Other places tend to have some subsidy. So one of the things that kind of really brings the price down is that there's a cost that's contributed by the local authority. Birmingham's a good example. So the cost is often brought down to the individual, to you or I, on the basis that there is that subsidy. I think another sort of key area of the sort of reason why costs are where they are sits with the costs at the nursery. So we are looking at how we can reduce those costs for Sheffield specifically, looking at how we can potentially advance purchase summer stock, because if you buy planting young and let it grow on, then you've got the opportunity of planting it at the right size, but at a cheaper cost, which can then be passed on to the customer. I think from my point of view, from the chair, myself and Miller met just the other day with the combined mayoral authority, and we're looking at the DEFRA Tree Fund, so that we're looking for essentially other sources of funding that could be contributed into the pot to help bring the cost down, to sort of help address that sort of subsidy issue. Maybe it's, if I can go to Paul and Kieran for any further detail.
I mean, Nathan, you said what I pretty much said in the chat. The most important thing is is that Amy and the council aren't making a profit at this. They're actually probably making a small loss, but we say at cost. But yes, other councils subsidise. Obviously, Sheffield Council's got a lot of priorities. You'll have seen its budget position, so it can't really afford to subsidise the trees. However, if we can apply for grants or funding from other sources, which other councils have done, then we can potentially have a fund to be able to bring that price down. And indeed, we mentioned that and discussed that, didn't we, Nathan, at the last partnership group meeting about one such option. And I know there are other irons in the fire too. So I'd be relatively confident that we will ultimately be able to do this. The question is how quick, because some of these grant sources require quite complex bureaucratic applications, as I've realised myself through doing a couple of those this last year. So it will take some time, but I'm pretty confident we will be able to bring the price down eventually.
I would say it's a priority for us.
Yeah, if I could just echo that, what Paul said, Nathan. Amy don't make any profit on community tree planting. We've reviewed prices several times at the request of the partnership, as you know, and we actually, as Paul said, make a small loss on it when we factor in our management time and administration time. So there's a lot of factors outside of our control which affect how much it actually costs to plant that tree. And I think yourself and Paul have highlighted those already.
I think it's also fair to say there's a big disparity in cost as to whether a tree is planted in a verge or whether it's planted in pavement.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'll just go to Nikki, who's got her hand up.
Just a quick one. We did debate whether to hold off launching the scheme until we'd managed to bring the price down, but there was interest already for people wanting to plant trees and things, so we decided to go ahead, even though it wasn't sort of at the price point we were happy with, just because there was appetite for something to be launched quickly.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, I think it's just important to flag that one, because it's something that the partnership's aware of, and active work is being done to look at any way we can bring the price of trees down, because we're aware that that is a blocker. But it's good to have the portal up there and just watch this space. We'll put out some announcements as and when we've managed to improve that situation. Got one
Sorry,
that I think I'm gonna...
Richard's got his hand up.
Oh, sorry. I couldn't see
Miller,
you,
sorry,
Richard.
I couldn't find my icon. My icon's disappeared, so I'm waving my proper hand. Yeah, just to add to that point, and this has been discussed a few times with councillors on the Waste and Streetscapes Committee, so they're fully aware of this, and we're doing all we can to try and find ways of subsidising this. So obviously working for the partnership, but the council as well. We have got a budget issue at the moment, so there's no funds there, but we are exploring every avenue to try and find funds to be able to subsidise this going forward.
Okay, I'm going to keep you, Richard, because we've got one asking about what happens to felled street trees. So I bet this is one for you and or Kieran. The question is, are they used in local biomass stations, or what are felled trees used for?
Yes, they go away to an energy from waste plant. So they're not biomass exactly, but it goes away to get energy back on the grid.
Fab. We've also got a question relating to the previous point about Norton Nursery, and just to ask you, Richard, does the council still have Norton Nursery?
It's not my area, so I will have to go and get some more detail on this. But I understand it's still our land, but I've got to be completely honest. I'm not aware what the Park Service are doing on that space at the moment. But I can take that offline if that person's asked the question, willing to give their details.
I don't think so. No, and it's not necessarily about just the cost of the tree, isn't it? It's about the cost of putting the tree in the ground, and there's a question related to that about, cost of verge versus payment, that maybe Richard or Kieran are better placed to answer than me.
Okay. What we'll do then is we'll look at another one. We've had a couple about placement of trees, and what kind of things are considered when deciding the placement of a street tree. So probably one for you, Kieran.
Yeah, so we'll go out and inspect the area where it's proposed that the tree will be planted. There's several things we look at. One primarily is if there's utilities running through a verge or an area. We also look at the implications for sight lines, for traffic and pedestrians, and whether it will cause any issues moving forward as the tree matures. But also fundamentally, we look at if it's a place where that tree will thrive, and take and mature.
Cool.
It's probably worth saying as well, Paul, you might be able to speak to this a bit better than I, that the Trees for Streets process has a series of questions that it asks.
Exactly that, Nathan. Exactly that, Nathan. Yeah, I mean, these are not things that rule the trees out completely, but it's things like, is the pavement width already 2 meters wide? If it's narrower, then that limits the chances. If it's 2 meters or more wide, then you've got a good chance. Things like, is your specific location within X meters of a BT telegraph pole, or is there a manhole cover, right next door to where you're about to hopefully put a tree? Things like that. But as you go through that step-by-step question, and you actually include photographs, you ideally upload a photograph to the Trees for Streets website when you're making an application. That's how you sort of get an idea. So it's well worth just flicking through the Trees for Streets website for Sheffield, and you get an idea just by doing that.
Fab. Thanks for that information. We've had quite a few points around the tree equity. People pointing out that there's a lot of trees in the more affluent parts of Sheffield. It's also potentially easier and cheaper to plant into the more affluent parts of the city, where there are more verges, less pavement planting. It's easier to crowdfund. And we've had a few questions around this, just about, like, I guess, what are we doing about tree equity, and what's the thinking on that? I'll go to you, Nathan, to start with.
Yeah, thanks, Miller. A number of things. Starting with talking to the LACs for the east of the city, the local area committees. We are trying to and starting to network as best as we can with active groups on the ground, because we recognise that in a lot of areas you can't just pilot trees in and expect that they'll be accepted. You can't do that. You might be able to on sort of arterial roads that are owned by the council, but you certainly can't in residential streets, particularly as people have views over parking and so on. So there is a sort of dual thing that we're looking to do, which is to create, and we're in the process of doing, which is creating useful information that we can go into local areas, speaking to people, and to help to dispel the negative points over street tree planting and to promote the benefits of planting, to encourage people to want planting in their area. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the Trees for Streets, yes, you're absolutely right. You can more readily crowdfund for trees in areas where there's more affluence. We're looking to encourage particularly businesses across the city to donate to a strategic pot, so a sort of philanthropic pot, if you like, where it's not linked to a location. So it's not saying I want a tree outside my house. It's here's some money and we recognise that planting should be within the city. And particularly to businesses to say, you should be looking to help plant those commuting routes and help plant where people who come to your businesses live. Again, with the focus really to the east of the city, to help to try and build up a pot of money that then the partnership can use to go into an area and say, look, we've got some money, let's work with you to plant some trees. The other thing we're doing is talking to the Combined Mayoral Authority about the same issue, particularly looking at housing land, the land that's owned by the authority that's not part of the Streets Ahead network, but still contributes to the street. And sort of ultimately a combination of all of those strategies. It's really our focus for this next year.
Cool. We've just had something come in pointing out that there's lots of green space around council housing estates, and that's underutilized. And just to make the point there that there's a bit of a kind of difference between that land and other streets in terms of its ownership and its management. So it's not part of the Streets Ahead contract between the council and Amy. So at the moment, we can't plant into that housing land through things like the Trees for Streets setup. It's not the same body.
Miller, you actually can.
Oh, you can.
Yeah, there's two options on the Trees for Streets website. So you can click a button that says plant on street or something similar, or click a button to plant in parks and other areas, but you can pick on a map. It looks like Richard wants to come in as well. So, but there are two options.
Yeah, and I would like to have Christine in on this one, because I know Christine has been doing a lot of work about housing land, because there are a few differences. So I'm going to bring Christine in first, and then we'll go to I think it's Richard next.
Yes, there's a number of things been coming in the chats. Yes, people are absolutely right. If you go to some places like Southie, there are enormous verges, actually, but it is the case that a lot of those verges are on housing land. So it's something that we've been working into, because clearly you can't say to somebody you can't have a tree outside your house when somebody around the next street can, when the verges look identical. So it was a kind of wrinkle that we're ironing out, but there are some management things in the background that I don't fully understand, because of the fact that if it was on street, it would go to Amy, and Amy would be maintaining it, whereas if it's housing, it's going to do something else. And I'll be honest, I will go to Richard with that one, because I don't know how that works.
Richard, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah,
help me out, Richard.
thanks, Kirsty. Thank you, Miller. Yeah, so Christy's absolutely right, and Paul's right. So Trees for Streets, you can put it in non-highway land. I suppose my responsibility is street scene regulation, so it is the highway street trees. But I'm working with colleagues to try and get equitative. We've got an exemplar strategy for street trees, and I'm trying to influence and push. But we have that same for housing and parks land and non-highway land across the city, and that's something we're trying to get pushed pretty quick. And there's a big piece of work underway on that. I suppose if people have got particular areas, open space land, which is not highway, and you want to put some community planting in there, then yeah, please contact us. There are ways to do it. And from a maintenance point of view, it would fall outside the streets ed contract, i.e. AME, but it would fall under housing or parks. But there are ways of doing this and getting the right tree species and getting more tree equity across those kind of areas, not just on the street scene. I know somebody's posted one earlier around, I think it was around the kind of tree planting in parks. So again, just trying to align our strategies. We've got a really good, clear street tree strategy. And Nathan's mentioned the sort of palette, the standard palette we're trying to develop. Again, I'm trying to influence parks and colleagues in housing to adopt that palette as well once that's completed, so we get some consistency across the city.
Excellent. I'm going to bring Nikki in, who's patiently had her hand up for a while.
I just want to mention that much of the planting that goes on in the parks and other green spaces owned by the council is done by the Sheffield Council Community Forestry team. If it's council-owned land, who are not separate to the partnership, but we do talk to them, obviously. So you may have seen some sort of public events and things that they're running, and they do look at housing land and parks land. And as Richard mentioned, there is a wider city trees and woodland strategy for the council. It was published a few years ago, and that's going to be refreshed in the next year. So we're just, this sort of cross. We're not the only people doing trees in Sheffield, and for larger woodlands, there's South Yorkshire Woodland Partnership for the larger woodlands as well.
I think, Miller, just to come back on that point as well, I forgot to mention, we are keen for one of the colleagues from housing or parks to be part of the partnership as well, because we know that that is a significant issue across the city. So we are keen to bring another council lead from parks or housing onto the partnership.
Yeah, no, we're generally looking at joining up, so working with other groups like the South Yorkshire Woodland Partnership that Nikki mentioned, and the South Yorkshire Mayor, and seeing what we can do to link up and ensure consistency, and look at supporting other schemes where there's planting that are not necessarily just street trees, although that is our focus, but where we can support each other. And we've actually got a question in the chat about engagement work in schools and bringing schools on board, and that's an area that I'm leading at the moment, so I'll take this one myself. We've just started an engagement strand, and at the moment I'm speaking to all these different organisations and seeing what engagement work everyone is already doing. So for example, Kieran's team in Amy have already got a great engagement programme focused around littering, particularly going into schools, doing litter picks, teaching about what happens to your litter when you leave it lying around, all that kind of stuff. And we're looking at, can we integrate some street tree stuff in that? They go and do free assemblies for schools. Can they do some street tree ones? Could they take classes out instead of a litter pick on a street tree patrol, for example? It's very early days at the moment, but we are looking at that, and we are talking to these other bodies and seeing if we can join up, because we know that schools have got a lot going on, and if we can provide a kind of unified approach where they're not getting bombarded by lots of different people wanting to talk about trees and environmental points. If we can bring them together, it'll be easier for schools to access, and hopefully help schools to get involved in street trees and things like looking after street trees in their immediate area, but also things like the other forms of planting we've talked about that are available. So planting on school sites, crowdfunding to plant in parks, and all the other forms. We've also had a few questions about the kind of planning side of things, looking at things like biodiversity net gain, and can like offset planting be be built into that. Trying to think who we've not heard from in a while. Do you want to start, Nathan? You've just appeared on my screen, so I assume that means you're keen.
Actually, it's probably Nikki who should be answering that one.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I love planning. We are trying to influence planning. Myself and Nathan and Carl input into the Sheffield draft local plan, the areas that related to street trees, trying to get those policies stronger, and they've seemed to have accepted our suggestions to strengthen the policies around street tree planting. We've also had one conversation with the council about biodiversity net gain. I'm going to do some internal training for the partnership around biodiversity net gain and how that relates specifically to street trees. I've actually had inquiry from Stag today about that topic as well, and shared some resources with them. It is, and we've also directly, as Nathan mentioned earlier, responded to just a small number now, just people starting to come to us, planning applications or alert us about street trees. But even better than that, we are getting early consultation about some of, say, the council schemes, sort of active travel schemes and that kind of thing, where as a partnership we're being recognised that if they engage with us early, we can have that early influence on trees. It's not to say that, you know, we're always in a position to save every tree or whatever, and that doesn't, you know, necessarily the case, but it might be that we influence the design to minimize loss, or influence the tree replacement species and number and that kind of thing. But I'd also encourage anybody else to comment as well, so it's not, you know, just us. Sometimes in my experience it's strength in numbers as well, if you have a strong feeling about that.
Okay, thanks for that, really comprehensive. We've got a few questions as well about the street tree warden schemes. We've had a question asked if they're paid. Sadly not. If we had that money, we'd pay them, but
not at the moment is the
not
answer.
at the moment, no. I've posted in the chat where to get more information if you are interested in being a tree warden. At the moment, our tree warden lead, Sarah, is kind of reviewing the programme for a couple of reasons, partly to expand the warden network and particularly into less affluent areas of the city, to help with that tree equity point, and also looking at how to better support the wardens and better use them. So as well as patrolling street trees, things like, can we use them as an engagement resource? Is that something some wardens might be interested in? And can we provide more training for wardens and more opportunities? So do keep an eye out, because more will be coming out about wardens, and there will be more recruitment coming forward. It's not just yet, but if you are interested, the information is there on the website and you can express interest, and we'll get back to you when we've got more to say on that. So do keep an eye.
It's Christine and Paul are both wardens.
Yep.
And it's been quite a recent development that Sarah has sort of stepped into a role of ultimately coordinating warden input as a conduit into the partnership, so wardens have a direct voice into the decision-making process.
We've got a question that's recently come in here, Nathan, that I'm going to direct at you, because it's about opportunities for planting on land around Sheffield churches, which I know you've got a bit of an insider view on.
I do, yes, because my wife works for the diocese. So what was the question specifically?
It was about opportunities for planting on land around Sheffield churches, noting that they're evenly distributed across the city like the schools, and it's just another land resource that we could use.
It's something that I talk to my wife about regularly. She's the buildings officer for the Sheffield diocese, covering the whole of Sheffield. And one of her specific asks is to, I think they're called PCCs, the councils in each church, who kind of govern the decisions for each church around sort of promoting external areas for biodiversity, but also for tree planting. And I know she's talking to the mayor's office around their free trees scheme. So I think it is in the offing. but it's a developing thing.
Okay. We've got one that came
Miller, just
Oh,
on
go
that,
on,
as far as
Nikki.
the Wildlife Trust, we've spoken with quite a number of churches as well, and the diocese advising on generally improving biodiversity of their grounds, and we're going to continue that relationship as well.
Fab. So yeah, it's been looked at from a couple of angles. I'll just come back to one that came in a bit earlier, which was looking backwards to the period of the dispute, and obviously a number of trees were felled. And the question was, at what point will we get back to kind of square one in terms of the environmental benefits of trees across the city? And I'll put that, I'll start with Richard, in case you know.
I don't, unfortunately, Miller, not to hand. I'm sure I could find it. I know Paul's put an answer in the chat. I think it's really difficult to get that exact figure, but I'm happy to take that offline and speak to colleagues within the council and see if we can come up with some kind of a figure for that. But unfortunately, I don't have that answer to hand. I don't know, Kieran, if you've picked that up along the way or.
I mean, tree stock within Sheffield is circa 36,000 trees. What that equates to, kind of balancing off from prior to the programme felling that caused the protest. I don't know, but I know the total tree stock.
It might be something that Christine and Paul have a better take on.
Yeah,
My
it might be
answer-
something you have to take
although-
away.
My answer in the chat was genuinely around 2,000 to 3,000 of the 5,500 trees did need to be felled. They were either dead already or very badly ill, and that and then have subsequently died, or need to be felled at some point anyway. But that said, that's still let's be honest, somewhere around 2,000 to 3,000 trees probably didn't need to be felled, and it will take some time for those to be the canopy cover to be recovered. That being said, even in a nest area, having planted 236 extra trees, and I know there's some in Kelham Island too, that does help. And actually, genuinely speaking, the quality of the tree stock in Sheffield is better because of Amy's work. For all the stuff in the tree campaign that we don't want to talk about, the actual quality of the tree stock and the way that Amy look after them is better than it was in the owned by Sheffield Council only days, which is quite interesting, isn't it, really? But that's a fact.
I mean, one of the biggest changes that I think is not really said but needs to be said is that before all of the partnership and all the strategy and all of the works, trees weren't regarded in the same way in terms of an asset that they are now. So trees are considered an asset in the street rather than the street taking the precedence. Now it's looked at much more holistically as to whether, when works are planned, are those works of greater or lesser value than the tree, and how do we work around the tree, or does this tree need to go for whatever reason? So ultimately, the sort of processes that are now in place value the tree, and the sort of starting point is retention rather than removal.
That's a really good point. And thanks for reading that, Nathan. I'm going to go to Christine, who's got a hand up.
I'm waving. Yeah. Yeah. As the sort of lead of the data and evaluation team, that is kind of on my list of things to work out. It's harder than you think, but it is on my list to work out. I mean, one of the things is the pre-contract data doesn't map to what's in confirmed. You can't connect them. It's for a number of reasons. Anyway, it's slightly tricky to do, but don't worry, it is on my list to do. One of the things that is important to think about is what is a benefit, is because tree stock before was actually far less diverse, and that has improved, even though we might not be up to a carbon volume yet. Actually, it's far more diverse, so it's going to be more resilient to things like climate change. they are being, you know, well maintained and properly pruned and things. So it's a bit of a balance as to what you decide is the same as before, like how you measure it, whether we're, because in some cases we might not be there yet, in some cases you might say we're actually ahead.
Yeah, it's a bit of a complicated picture, isn't it? But I think it's a good point to make that we do have the data and evaluation strand that Christine is heading up, and various different metrics are in use and being looked at to better quantify the street tree resource and what benefits they bring and how that can be understood and managed going forwards.
Can I just add to that, Miller, that I would say that one of the overriding points of the partnership is its transparency. So, you know, when we work through this data, it will be available.
Yeah. So we do publish pretty much everything we do on the website. All the minutes for the meetings are on there, so you can see what's been discussed. As has been mentioned, when new works are coming forward and proposals, if there's, you know, a number of trees being affected, the partnership will often be putting a view in. We've had some questions asked about some of the streets that are still in the process for being sort of resurfaced and sorted out, that were put on pause around the time of the dispute. So yeah, just to address that is in motion, and the partnership is being consulted on the proposed designs. I don't know.
Probably worth Richard picking that up, I think.
Yeah, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, thanks, Miller. Yeah, absolutely. So we do see the partnership as key in that process. But as people all know, the Lowcock inquiry, we've made a commitment to getting designs done for March the 6th, 2024, and then getting the works done on those outstanding streets which weren't done as part of the core investment programme by March 2025, and we're still on track with that. We are going out pretty soon on consultation, the first stages. It's not going to be easy, and we know that, but again, Nathan's point about being completely transparent, that's what we're trying to be. So there will be a few issues around certain streets, but we are committed to those 26 outstanding streets to getting them sorted in the next year or so.
Wow. Nikki.
It's just worth noting, I hope, and that's taken a bit of time, the partnership. I hope people tonight appreciate the breadth of work of the partnership. I heard somebody recently saying, we just think about our work is just about managing trees, but I hope people have realised it's a lot more than that. It's things about the tree equity, the planting, the wardens, the community. So we've got a lot going on, and obviously we welcome people getting involved through those groups and the street wardens, because to sort of build that capacity has been mentioned. So if you are interested, you know, do take that opportunity to get involved and help us with all this work.
Just to echo that, Nick, I just obviously there's a few people on the call whose job it is, but there's also a number of people who are just volunteers and commit their time and effort on sociable hours. So as Nick has mentioned, on the CIP streets, the core investment programme outstanding streets, there's been a lot of demands on the partnership to assess those plans and to work on that. And I say some are volunteers and giving up their own time. So I think that needs to be acknowledged. And if you do want to come along and join the partnership, then you'd be more than welcome.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point that lots of people are putting in lots of their own time on this to try and ensure the best outcomes for the street trees and the points that are in that strategy, and trying to push them forward. What I'm going to do, and we've said we'd end the Q&A at around about 8, and obviously we've overshot by 5 minutes. I will ensure all the questions in the chat do get captured. So if yours hasn't been answered, it will get captured and we will put them up on the website. I'm going to launch a poll now, which is just 4 very quick multiple choice feedback questions. It would be great if you can feedback on those. We also have a Google form that you can use to feedback, and I'll just post that in the chat. That's a bit of a longer feedback form if you want to fill in a bit more detail. or give us any pointers and suggestions for future webinars or anything that you'd be interested in seeing. I think there's been some really interesting questions. There's been some really good points, lots about tree equity and things that the partnership can do to improve our reach and to particularly get into parts of the city that really need the benefit of trees. So it's really great to see all these suggestions, and I will capture them all, and we will look at them and consider them. If you have anything else, do look at our website. There's a contact form on there that will come through to me and to Christine. So we will receive anything that you put in there. So if there's anything that you would like to let the partnership know or ask us, then do use that form. Otherwise, thank you all for joining us. Nathan, is there anything you'd like to say to wrap us up?
Only that I'm really grateful for all of your time to come and listen to us talk about Sheffield's trees. We are, as a city, passionate about our trees, and quite rightly so. So I think I just want to thank you all, and look out for future events, and please join us again.
Fabulous. Thanks, everybody. We'll circulate the recording and we'll also post it up on our website. So do look out for that. If there's anyone you know that couldn't come, point them in that direction. And thank you again for joining us, and good night.
Good night.